Good morning and welcome to Saturday Matters. Karen Place, whom you are accustomed to seeing up here introducing the speaker, has come down with something. Don't worry, she tested negative for COVID, but she's got the sniffles and she's got a runny nose and she has a cough, and she thought it best that she not come down here and spread germs in a crowded place like this. So I have to introduce myself. I am Hal Piper. I have been going. Our subject today is Israel, Hamas, stories behind the story. I think the elevator met us. I think the elevator may have said the story behind the story, but there's more than one story. It isn't just one, this is a complicated matter. So it's really stories behind the story. The events that led to the present. Hi. I got my own rooting section here, daughter and grandson. The events that led to the present Hamas, Israel, Hamas tragedy comprise many stories, and there's no one story that explains it all. Our first story begins, going down the time tunnel now, in search of the answer to a foundational question, time and place, the summer of 1948, at a YMCA camp in rural Baltimore County. It was there that I learned the song Young Folks, Old Folks, the Sunday school song. Some of you too will have learned it at summer camp. Some of you too will have learned it at summer camp in those days, so feel free to sing along. Young folks, old folks, everybody come, join a happy Sunday school and have a lot of fun. Please check your shooting irons and razors at the door, and there'll be lots of stories that you never heard before. Well, that's the chorus. The key verse. David was a shepherd boy, a plucky little cuss. Along comes Goliath, looking for a fuss. David saw he'd have to fight in God, he placed his trust. So he picked up a pebble and he busts Goliath's crust. And now the relevant question, Goliath, as we know, was a Philistine. Palestine? Good grief, does this suggest that this Israeli-Palestinian business goes back 3,000 years? No. Scholars looking at cultural artifacts suggest that the Philistines were Greeks or Proto-Greeks who migrated to the eastern Mediterranean from the Aegean area about 1200 BCE. Today's Palestinians are Arabs who originated in modern Saudi Arabia and spread westward across North Africa and into Spain in the decades and centuries after Muhammad's death in 632. So glad to have that cleared up. But it doesn't help us with the most important question. Student protesters last spring. You know, you're two rookies sitting up at the desk who don't understand PowerPoint very well. Aaron to the rescue. So we get back to number 2. That's it? Yeah. But knowing that Goliath was not a Palestinian doesn't help us with the most important question. Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys in this war? Because as we all know, one side is a bloodthirsty aggressor and the other is a virtuous victim. But we don't all agree on which side is which. Some of this polarization I blame not on historians, but on college professors. I apologize to the many college professors in the audience here. But we're talking especially about some in sociology and anthropology departments. These professors have developed an analysis of social relations called intersectionality. That is, at the intersection point, who has the power and who does not have power? At its crudest, men have power and use it to oppress women, who lack the power and therefore are victims. Now, I don't wish to overgeneralize. White people have power, people of color do not, and so on. In Vietnam, the United States was strong, the Viet Cong was weak. Militarily, Israel is certainly more powerful than Hamas. It holds a monopoly of violence, in the words of a Cornell professor. Believe it or not, he was speaking after October 7th, when quite a bit of violence went on from the Hamas side. Therefore, the moral and just thing to do is to root for the underdog, Hamas. Or so many American college students, egged on by their professors, came to believe last spring. And by extension, we come to Jewish settler colonialism. The dogma that Zionist Jews, like European colonists in the so-called New World, barged into somebody else's territory, drove out the inhabitants, and claimed ownership of the land. Well, there's something to this from childhood. I remember the slogan, "A land without a people, for a people without a land." It does sound a little like settler colonialism. And the exponents of this theory have a set of statistics. Between 1947 and 1951, that is right at the time of the establishment of the Israeli state, the Arab population dropped from 778,000 to 171,400. Well, the land controlled by the Jewish establishment, that's a carefully wrought phrase, controlled by the Jewish establishment, rose from 13.5% to 92%. Therefore, the Palestinians have a right to eliminate their oppressors. Well, I'm actually not exaggerating when I say they have the right to, I say they have the right when I say that it is argued that they have the right to eliminate their oppressors. Shut them out. When this clumsy analysis collides with the realities of the Middle East, it loses all touch with historical facts. It requires an astonishing leap of ahistorical delusion to disregard the record of anti-Jewish racism over the 2 millennia since the fall of the Judean Temple in 70 CE, until finally the Zionist project was indeed to find a land without a people for a people without a land. Well, there were people in that land. If you look at this map, you can't really see, but you know where Israel is over there, but it's so small, it's surrounded by all these Arab countries. Iran is not an Arab country. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Iraq, Jordan. It's not as though there's nowhere in the world for Arabs to live. The current population in the state of Israel is 9.4 million, but there are 2 million Arabs living in Israel. All the surrounding Arab states, not Iran or Turkey, 253 million people. So these Jewish settlers have a long way to go before they eradicate the Arab presence. I remember, and probably you do too, when the objective of a college education was to teach students not what to think, but how to think critically. Now, with the Palestinian death toll this year in this war passing 41,000 and rising daily, it's not that I hold Israel blameless. A recital of the historical background demonstrates that both sides have been treated badly, and not only by each other. Henry Kissinger, when he was President Nixon's Secretary of State, used to say to the Palestinians, they never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity for peace. The same can be said, and perhaps especially this week, about Israel. We'll talk about peace prospects later, but right now I'd like to run through some history of mutual victimization. Let's find the original sin at the root of all this violence. Here we had biblical Israel. Can you just go back one? Well, this was after the kingdom was split into two, northern Israel and Judah in the south. But actually that looks very much like today's borders of Israel. I mean, there's a little bulge here and a little emptiness there. But that looks pretty close to the current location and boundaries of Israel. But there's been a lot of history in the last 3,000 years. Lord Byron described the first tragedy. The Assyrian came down like the wolf on the fold. So there was the Assyrian captivity, and then there was the captivity by the Babylonian Empire, Psalm 137, by the rivers of Babylon. There we sat down, yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. It's Mount Zion in Jerusalem, surmounted until then, but until at that time, or until then, it was destroyed by the Babylonians, by the Jewish temple, and now by the 1400-year-old Al-Aqsa Mosque, sacred to Muslims as the site of the Prophet Muhammad's departure to heaven. Both faiths have historical and spiritual claims to the Holy Land. But just as Jews mostly were not sovereign there, neither were Arabs for the last millennium. Christian crusaders came and went, then the Mamelukes and Ottoman Turks, and with the collapse of the Ottomans after World War I, the territory passed into British control, as mandated by the League of Nations. Here's that. You can see in the map Egypt down here to the lower left, Syria at the top, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Transjordan, which was a new state. All of these had been part of the Ottoman Empire to one degree or another, and including the province of Palestine. Both Arabs and Jews have complained about their treatment by the British, who apparently made conflicting promises to them during World War I to secure their support against the Turks, who were fighting on the side of the German Empire. And both Arabs and Jews during the interwar period between World War I and II, both Arabs and Jews mounted terrorist campaigns against British rule, independently, not together. Which brings us to the post-World War II creation of the Israeli state. Here we have a split screen. On the left side is the original partition plan. Now, I'm sorry for the poor contrast in this, but there is a sort of there's an area that is quite white and the other is somewhat shady, but rather light. The low contrast makes it difficult to read, but the three pale shaded parts, one near Egypt and one above near Lebanon, and then the one with Jerusalem in it in the middle, those were to go to the Arabs. And the meandering lighter part, that was to go to the Jews, to Jewish Palestine. Jerusalem was to be under international administration. Looking back at that map, 77 years later, I have to wonder if at least a few venerable Palestinians quietly muttered to themselves, Kissinger was right, we missed an opportunity. There could have been a Palestinian state. But the Arab world, not only Palestinians, but Egypt, Syria, Jordan, would not have it. It had to be all or nothing. So they declared war. Egypt, Syria, and Jordan declared war on the new state of Israel and lost decisively. The right side map shows the post-war armistice lines of 1949. Israel's territorial gains made its map at least look a little more viable. The colored area Gaza, down next to the Mediterranean and Egypt, that was occupied by Egypt, and the shaded area around Jerusalem, that's the West Bank, which was occupied by Jordan. Let's pause for a moment to consider the process of decolonization after World War II. At the very same time that the United Nations was dividing Britain's Palestine mandate between Jews and Arabs, thank you. At the very same time that the United Nations was dividing Britain's Palestine mandate between Jews and Arabs, it was doing the very same thing in India, dividing the colonial British Raj between Hindus in India and Muslims in Pakistan. Do you remember the 1982 movie Gandhi with Ben Kingsley playing the part of the Mahatma? 40 years later, I remember a distant shot of what was called the exchange of populations. Long intersecting lines of human beings, old and young, Muslims moving this way, the Hindus moving that way, passing each other on the road, surrounded only by horizons and space. And isn't that locution precious? The exchange of populations. George Orwell mocked the sanitized wording in his essay, Politics in the English Language. What that exchange means, he wrote, I'm quoting from vague memories, I don't have the text handy, is driving a people from their homes and making them walk whatever possessions they can carry, including grandma and the baby, to some place they have never been and directing them to make a life there. That's the exchange of populations. And there was an exchange of populations at the same time in the newborn nation of Israel, remembered now mostly as affecting Palestinian Arabs driven from their homes. There had been an exchange of population in 1923 after the Greek-Turkish Civil War, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. That's what they called it then, the exchange of populations. Greeks came back from Asia Minor to Europe, and Turks moved east across the Sea of Marmara. My purpose here is not to approve or condemn the events of 1947 and 48, but to broaden the context. Awful things happen to people all the time, and sometimes it is confusing or futile to assign the blame. Are the British to blame for the partition of India? The Hindu Gandhi wanted to keep India whole. Jinnah, the Muslim leader, insisted on a dedicated homeland for his minority Muslims. There are an awful lot of them, but India had an awful lot of people, and he knew that they were a minority and they might be second-class citizens in a united India. So who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? And we know that the partition solution, two Muslim homelands, one to the east and one to the west, failed. A liberation war in 1971, supported vigorously by India, broke up Pakistan and created the new nation of Bangladesh in the east. Punjabis and Pashtuns in the west, Bengalis in the east, they may all be Muslims, but that didn't mean that they could live in one nation. Who is to blame for the decades-long fallout of the partition of Palestine? Britain, or the European orientation of the early United Nations, or the obstinance of the Arab nation, not only the Palestinian Arabs, but Egypt and Syria and Jordan as well? You can make cases in either way, anyway. Those three nations, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, reprised the 1948 war in 1956, over the Suez Canal, 1967, and Israel grew bigger. There was another war, the Yom Kippur War in 1973, and another in 1982. This last one focused in Lebanon. I have a particular interest in the 1982 war because I covered it as a correspondent for the Baltimore Sun. I was no Mideast expert. My beat, based in Germany, was Western Europe. And we had a man in Jerusalem, but when the war broke out, he had to stay in Jerusalem to cover the Israeli side of the conflict. My editors consulted a map to see there was a Baltimore Sun guy not too many time zones away, and that's how I found myself on a plane headed for Lebanon. By this time, the nearby Arab nations, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, were exploring ways to find a modus vivendi with Israel, but non-state groups, in particular Yasser Arafat's Palestine Liberation Organization, were keeping the anti-Israel faith. Lebanon was in the midst of its own civil war, resulting from tensions between its Christian and Muslim populations, and the Lebanese government had lost control of its southern border region. Arafat's PLO moved in and started lobbing rockets into Israel, and Israel sent a task force to clear the PLO out. It took most of the summer, but eventually Arafat and his fighters boarded a ship bound for Tunis, firing their weapons into the air to show that they had not been defeated, but merely had chosen to relocate. If you were leaving Lebanon, I don't think you can see the raised rifles, but meanwhile, the problem of the west bank of the Jordan River was festering. Here are the armistice lines showing the west bank from 1949 on the right there. Let's have another look at the armistice lines. Note Jordan is extended out to the east. Well, it's not part of the not part of the, that was from the British mandate. Could Jordan itself then, including the West Bank, have become the Palestinian homeland? Jordan's population was already majority Palestinian, but sparsely settled, and adding the densely populated West Bank would have trebled its population. The United States and the United Kingdom backed the annexation, But the most powerful Arab states, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Syria, plus Lebanon, did not. They voted to expel Jordan from the Arab League, apparently fearing that Jordan's King Abdullah was getting too big for his britches. Could all the subsequent history have been avoided simply by saying that yes, Jordan is Palestine's homeland? Now, is it really necessary to know all this detail? No, but just to make the point that all along, the Israel-Palestine tragedy has been about more than just Israel and Palestine. Despite Arab League opposition, Palestinians did become citizens of Jordan. They voted, they held office, and for his troubles, King Abdullah was assassinated in July of 1951 during a visit to the Al-Aqsa Mosque by a Palestinian gunman following rumors that he was discussing a peace treaty with Israel. Can't have that. Long ago, we recall, the West Bank was supposed to be the basis of the Palestinian state. Look at the West Bank. Actually, can we move on to the next one? Yeah. Showing the areas of control. The areas A and B, the little spotty dots and spots, those are the Palestinian enclave for the Palestinians were to be controlled. What a Swiss cheese that is. Hardly any contiguous land. An estimated 3 million Palestinians now live in the West Bank, alongside more than 500,000 Jewish settlers, whose numbers have increased by more than 15% in the last 5 years. A recent Washington Post article reckoned that the Israeli government had approved strategic land seizures, almost 6,000 acres this year alone, and major settlement construction, escalated demolition of Palestinian property, and increased state support for illegally built settler outposts. Together, they mark the most significant territorial changes in the West Bank in decades. While the Biden administration insists that any diplomatic solution to the war in Gaza must include a path to an independent Palestinian state, radical Jewish settlers and their far-right political backers, who've ascended to the highest levels of Israel's government, are redrawing the map in real time, making the two-state solution envisaged in past peace accords effectively impossible. In interviews across 6 Palestinian communities, the Post reported, residents described paralyzing constraints on daily life as settlements creep closer, limiting their ability to move freely and to access the farmlands that long sustained them. Settler violence has erased some villages. And why do the Israeli authorities keep grabbing off parcels for Israeli settlement? It was to create facts on the ground as a prod for negotiations. Concentrate your minds, you Palestinians. Do you want to accept a Palestinian state on the West Bank, or do you not? We are building. You are not. We are patience. Is patience your best strategy? Meanwhile, of course, Palestinians created their own facts on the ground. We are in Lebanon, shelling your Galilee. How long do you want to put up with it? Is it time to make a deal? After a quarter century, the many facts planted on West Bank have created not a prod to negotiations, but an obstacle to them. So why can't they make a deal? Remember when Jordan's Palestinian king was assassinated in 1951 by a fellow Palestinian who had heard rumors that the king was about to make a deal with Israel? Well, I have only half a story. I met Yasser Arafat once during that 1982 Lebanon war. It was just for 5 or 10 minutes. And what I remember is that under the Israeli guns, he was all patience and calm. With time and patience, he said, much can be achieved. So, a reasonable fellow, just waiting for a reasonable Israeli counterpart. That quote, with time and patience, much can be achieved, came back to me a decade later in a meeting of the Baltimore Sun editorial board. Our guest was Jesse Jackson, and he echoed almost exactly Yasser Arafat's words, with time and patience, much can be achieved. Now, I insist that I do not wish to suggest any moral equivalence between Jesse Jackson and Yasser Arafat. just to note the wonderful temporizing effects of the words with time and patience. Much can be achieved. But then at about the same time, or a little later, there was another encounter with Yasser Arafat, and I was not present. Someone asked him, why don't you accept the negotiated peace plan? You were at the table. What is the obstacle? As reported, Arafat replied, because if I accepted that plan today, I would be assassinated tomorrow. Well, why negotiate at all if you risk your life to agree to anything? I suppose it must be to maintain your stance as a reasonable leader with time and patience. Much can be achieved. Israel's Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin, apparently did not profit from Arafat's example. He went ahead with peacemaking and paid the price. On the evening of November 4th, 1995, Rabin was assassinated by a Jewish law student and right-wing extremist who opposed the signing of the Oslo Accords. Oh yes, the Oslo Accords of 1993. Israel accepted Arafat's Palestine Liberation Organization as the representative of the Palestinians, and the PLO renounced terrorism and recognized Israel's right to exist in peace. Both sides agreed that a Palestinian Authority would be established and assume governing responsibilities in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip over a 5-year period. Fair enough, if both parties agreed. But the accords never came into full effect. On both sides, there was opposition. The Palestinian-American philosopher Edward Said described the accords as a Palestinian Versailles, recalling the treaty ending World War I. It was widely denounced as unfairly punitive to the Germans. Hamas was formed at this time, articulating a vision of an Islamic state in all of historical Palestine and rejecting the Oslo Accords. In a move to scuttle peace talks, Hamas initiated a series of suicide attacks against Israeli targets. On the streets, Palestinian terrorists launched the Second Intifada. And then on the other hand, we had a Jewish assassin demonstrating his opposition by murdering the Prime Minister. And recall the broader context. Jordan's King Abdullah was assassinated by a Palestinian, Yitzhak Rabin by a Jew. Arafat was canny enough not to agree to anything that might get him assassinated by a fellow Palestinian. Is the problem then that no peace can be concluded because the extremist crazies on both sides will not accept a peace plan that is not maximalist, that does not grant King David at least the approximate boundaries of the Jewish state in King David's time, that does not grant Israel the approximate boundaries from King David's time in 1000 BCE. The most devout, God-believing Jews called for Eretz Israel, a Jewish state in the territory of which matched the largest expanse of biblical Israel. Well, quote from Deuteronomy 11:24. Every place where you set your foot will be yours. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the Euphrates River to the Mediterranean Sea. All right, Euphrates, it's in orange, right, kind of in the middle of the, well, most of it is in Iraq or Syria. From there to the Mediterranean. God said so. Biblically, yeah. All that land rightly belongs to Israel. So half of modern-day Iraq is really part of Eretz Israel. Interestingly, from the river to the sea is also a Palestinian slogan, but the river in question is not the Euphrates, but the Jordan. Not only the West Bank, but all the land from the river to the sea. The slogan is often understood by Jews, it has a history, as eliminationist. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free of Jews. If Eretz Israel represents the absolutist wing of the Israeli government, Hamas is its political counterpart. Here is Yahya Sinwar, whom Israel regards as the mastermind who devised the October 7th sneak attack last year on Gaza. The timing is suggestive of the motive. For several years, a number of Arab countries, shepherded by Saudi Arabia and mediated by the United States, have been edging closer to Israel. This rapprochement culminated in September 2020 in the Abraham Accords. These were bilateral agreements, not a multinational treaty, signed between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, and on the other hand, side by side, between Israel and Bahrain. On September 15th, 2020, the signing of the agreements was hosted by President Trump on the Truman balcony of the White House, amid elaborate staging. And the name, Abraham Accords, was intended to highlight the common belief of Judaism and Islam in their common descent from the biblical Abraham. As part of the two agreements, both the UAE and Bahrain recognized Israel's sovereignty, enabling the establishment of full diplomatic relations. The gradual warming continued. Israeli airlines were granted the right to use routes through Saudi airspace. The Arab news service Al Jazeera began to quote Israeli officials on its broadcasts. Hints appeared suggesting the advantages to Arab nations of trade ties with Israel, with new commercial and cultural links. Wow, for some generations, some Arabs who were unable to utter the word Israel ostentatiously demeaned it as the Zionist entity. And now they were talking about diplomatic relations. In September last year, Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the United States were poised to announce a deal including just that, diplomatic relations, recognition of Israel. Now, if you were Yahya Sinwar, what would you do? Watch idly while the peacemakers took a major step toward defusing the centuries-old Mideast tinderbox? Publish a communique announcing that events are unfolding not necessarily to the advantage of the Palestinian cause. No. He sent his fighters over the border in an assault that killed 1,200 Israelis, mostly civilians, grabbed about 250 hostages, and shocked Israel and the world. We are still here, the attack announced. We are still here, and you have to deal with us. Sinwar himself now proudly trumpets that his Hamas forces have won. Just last month, from his presumed bunker far beneath the streets of his ruined Gaza, he said, "We have them where we want them. The world has turned against Israel. We have achieved our objective." If it is a victory, it's a pretty expensive one. More than 41,000 Palestinians dead, nearly 100,000 wounded in the 11 months of fighting so far. Muslim civilians, including many women and children, a ruined territory, roads and buildings, shops and factories, homes and schools and hospitals and rubble. What price victory? A pricey victory indeed. But what we see night after night on the evening news confirms Sinwar's boast. Intersectionality again. Mighty Israel is bullying the defenseless Gazans. Look, they bombed a hospital. Look, they bombed a school. It was a legitimate military target, as they plainted Israeli response. Hamas hides a command post under that hospital, hides a weapons cache under that school. And so we hear of war crimes. We hear of proportionality. How many civilians must die in the cause of military necessity? Let's take a look at the so-called rules of war. The first and essential point is that these laws do not decide right and wrong. The entire reason wars happen at all is each side knows that it is right and justified and that the other side is wrong and barbaric. Since there will be wars then, can we establish some rules for the protection of civilians? An article in the Atlantic magazine by Noah Feldman, a professor at Harvard Law School, brings some clarity. When used correctly, Professor Feldman writes, the terms of international humanitarian law apply universally to all people fighting all wars, whether just or unjust. Their core value is to insist that some actions are so morally wrong that they should never be tolerated, even if the side that perpetrates them is morally right in a given conflict. Put another way, under international humanitarian law, the ends do not justify the means. Thus, Rule 1 is the principle of distinction between soldiers and civilians. Military targets are fair game in war, civilian targets are not. But then, what about collateral damage? Civilians who may be killed in the course of a military operation. Such attacks are governed by the law of proportionality. This is probably the most confusing principle in humanitarian law. What constitutes disproportionality? It is not mere body count, but a relative measure. The accidental collateral damage to civilians must be proportionate, not excessive, relative to the military advantage that the attacker is pursuing in that specific military act. For example, if the goal is to destroy a military base and it is possible to target that base alone, destroying the entire surrounding neighborhood would be excessive or disproportionate. As one U.S. military manual cited by the International Red Cross puts it, in attacking a military target, the amount of suffering or destruction must be held to the minimum necessary to accomplish the mission. Okay. Tell me how that's going to work out. The question of proportionality in war is challenging. To say what is or is not excessive or disproportionate requires a judgment call based on cost-benefit analysis. But how can anyone weigh the costs and benefits of incommensurable goods, like lives, and military advantage? In practice, militaries like those of the US and Israel follow procedures that are supposed to anticipate damage in advance and try to keep it within reason. The law recognizes that proportionality is imprecise, but relies on it so we can avoid the most extreme deviations from its core principle. All wars end, and the Israel-Gaza war will end too. How? And then what? It is hard to feel optimistic. In the immediate aftermath of the Israeli military operation, humanitarian and reconstruction needs will be gargantuan. Yeah, that's it. Some 90% of Gaza's population of 2.3 million has been displaced, often multiple times. By one reckoning, for each square yard in the Gaza Strip, there is now more than 250 pounds of debris. Who is going to take charge of the restoration of Gaza, and who is going to pay for it? Israel may have to provide a temporary security presence, but it surely will not wish to occupy Gaza long term. In the slightly longer term, experts point to a possible coalition of Arab states, potentially the signatories of the Arab Accords, which Israel feels it can work with, that could serve as an interim force to fill the security and governance vacuum in Gaza with support from the United States, the European Union, and the United Nations. I can see Egyptian, Jordanian, and Saudi soldiers with the international community controlling the region during an interim stage, and a huge amount of money that will come from the United Arab Emirates and the Saudis in order to reconstruct. This is from Ami Ayalon, the former chief of Israeli Domestic Intelligence Agency, Shin Bet. But the longer and the bloodier Israel's campaign in Gaza is, the more challenging it will become to secure the cooperation of Arab states. The further out that one looks, the murkier Gaza's future becomes. If Hamas is removed after running the Gaza Strip since 2007, the most obvious candidate to fill the void would be the Palestinian Authority, which runs the West Bank. The Palestinian Authority was created in the wake of the Oslo peace process in the mid-1990s, with the hopes of laying the groundwork for a future Palestinian state. But this is not a great best-case scenario. First, there are the optics, what it looks like. The PA, Palestine Authority, was ousted from Gaza by Hamas in 2007. They actually had an election there. In 2005, Israel pulled out its settlements, moved up, and turned it over to the Palestinians. It was sort of a test case for a two-state solution in a limited neighborhood, Gaza. They had an election, and Hamas and the Palestine Authority pretty much tied. It was very, very close, so they set up a coalition government. And Hamas started assassinating all the people in the Palestinian Authority. So the Palestinian Authority left it to Gaza, and that's where, to Hamas, and that's where it's been ever since. Well, the Palestinian Authority is unlikely to embrace the idea of returning in the wake of a punishing Israeli military campaign to unseat its rival. They don't want to be viewed as coming in on an Israeli tank and taking over the Gaza Strip, said Zaha Hassan, a fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And then there's the question of legitimacy. The PA hasn't held a presidential election since that one in 2005, when Mahmoud Abbas, who is now 87 years old, was first elected. An overwhelming majority of Palestinians see the PA as corrupt and inefficient, while its security operation with Israel in the West Bank is regarded with deep suspicion, as Israeli settlers have continued to chip away at Palestinian lands. Many analysts insist that the only long-term solution to address Israel's need for security and Palestinians' hope for self-determination is to work toward a political solution to the conflict. President Biden constantly reiterates his support for a peace deal and the creation of a Palestinian state. But well before the Hamas attacks of last October, hopes for such a deal had long since slid into the rearview mirror. Support for a two-state solution among both Israelis and Palestinians has declined precipitously in recent years, according to polling. Still, many see it as the only viable way to resolve the conflict. Here again is Ami Ayalon, the former director of Israeli intelligence. If we want to see the state of Israel safe and without losing our identity as a Jewish democracy, this is the only concept, because otherwise we shall create an apartheid state, and we shall never be secure. Let's see, I think, so on to the last one. As the death toll rises and the humanitarian suffering in Gaza compounds, can it be otherwise than that Israel's pursuit of security now will sow the seeds of future insecurity? I can't even begin to wrap my brain around the long-term humanitarian and even security implications, said Khalid El-Gindi, director of the program on Palestine and Palestinian-Israeli affairs at the Middle East Institute of the Brookings Institution. In the same way that Israelis have this desire for revenge, we can assume that the same human impulse is going to be present on a much more massive scale among Palestinians. Okay, now that you're all feeling optimistic, I'll take questions.
I may have missed it, Hal. Did you say anything about the Black September thing?
No.
More Palestinians were killed in that than in any other conflict, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I didn't say that. I didn't.
You
can't do it. I think you just said it. So, yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, that was an oversight. I probably should have mentioned that.
After the horrendous atrocity of Hamas, I've always wondered, well, what would have been a good response by Israel? It had to respond. We don't like the way it did respond. Was there a better alternative? I can't visualize it.
No, I can't either. But this, of course, is where the law of proportionality comes in. Was it excessive? Well, there are hundreds of miles of tunnels, as you undoubtedly all heard, dug underneath the streets and hospitals and schools of Gaza, and that's, if you're trying to root out Hamas terrorists, that's where you've got to go to get them. All right, well, how does that compare with 41,000 deaths and the ruin of schools and hospitals? Yeah. No, I don't have an answer to that, but I certainly understand why some people say this is not proportional, and why other people say, well, and whom are we to blame but the people that are in effect holding their own population hostage?
To what extent Is Iran a destabilizing factor?
Well, to a considerable extent, Iran bankrolls Hamas and also Hezbollah, where Yasser Arafat and the PLO used to be raining rockets into Israel. And well, now there's another group, but they again are supported by Iran. And Iran supports the Houthis in Iran, which is not part of the Israel conflict. But yes, Iran is really up to its elbows in blood.
You mentioned the possibility of the Saudis and their other allies working with Israel to solve some of these problems. But isn't there a split between the Hamas on the Shiite side and the Saudis on the Sunni side that's going to block that?
Yes, I don't think it's a religious split. I don't think it's a matter of Sunnis and Shias. But Saudi Arabia really is sort of leading the effort to herd the Arabs toward rapprochement with Israel. And so, I mean, there certainly is that kind of split. And Saudi Arabia and Iran, in a larger sense, are rivals for leadership of the Middle East Muslim world. And there it is a religious split. The Shias and Iran is Shia and Saudi Arabia is Sunni. You always wonder, though, I mean, it's convenient to label it as a religious split, but I'm not sure that people go to bed at night in those countries saying, you know, when those other people wake up and join our brand of Islam, I don't think that's it. It's, in that sense, it's sort of like Northern Ireland, you know. Well, we said they were Catholics and Protestants, but it wasn't because they had different views of the Virgin Mary's assumption, bodily assumption into heaven. You know, that had nothing to do with it. It was tribal. You know, this is my team, and that's the other team. Bob.
Yeah, how do counters distinguish military from non-military casualties?
Well, the 41,000 doesn't distinguish. I mean, it's everybody. I've often thought, you know, I wonder if everybody who dies is counted as a victim of the war, even if the problem was a heart attack, or measles or something like that. You know, so I don't see. And I'm sure somewhere there's a distinction made just how many of them are civilians. But at the moment, they're all lumped together in that 41,000 figure.
My question really has to do with the fundamental right to live in Israel. It's tied to a religious set of beliefs. And if we take an egalitarian view of religion, and believe me, I have much sympathy for the suffering of the Jews in World War II and throughout history. But what is the purpose? I mean, yes, the land is historically of interest, but it's not great land. I mean, the Jews have definitely made it more productive, but it's a small piece of land that has this huge and fraught history. Would it be worth just raising philosophically, is Israel for Jews a place where they can create their own religion and their own community with values that reflect that religion, which is also Judeo-Christian, or is it tied to that actual piece of land? And if it is, what does that say about our civilization and our occupation of what belongs to Native Americans? I guess I'm just really trying to change the conversation to what claim does any group of people have to a particular piece of land, and when does that cease to serve its purpose?
Well, I don't think it's a naive question at all. I think it's a very subtle, astute question, because it's kind of hard in secular America to realize how important religion really is to many other people in many other places. We do talk about the spiritual claims to the land of, for example, the indigenous people in the United States, and we can be very understanding about that. And I think it's sort of similar to the Israeli feeling of being bound up in that land because they have their texts and their ceremonies and things like that. There are Islamic republics. They're not. I don't think they necessarily. I don't get the feeling that they have quite the same. In some of these countries across North Africa, for example, because it has a shorter history, and their history they trace it back to Mecca, and but when you're in Libya or someplace like that, well, that's why you have to go on the Hajj and to the pilgrimage. So it's there the tie is to another land. We had immigrants with great ties to, for example, Ireland. The old country. And some of them, the ties were so strong that they would send money to the IRA, to get the bloody Brits out. And so you start talking about one thing and you find it sliding into something else. But I'm glad you raised that point. It's very much worth thinking about. It's not only about the economic productivity of the land of Israel, but it's also about how they feel about their sacred Mount Zion, and how Arabs feel also
They have the right to
about.
practice their own religion in peace.
Mm-hmm.
In 1948, In 1948, I was quite naive about all this, but even then I thought this is unjust to kick people out that have been there for thousands of years. And I kind of vaguely recognized, well, the sort of Judeo-Christian traditions of our own country made us agree that, yeah, this belongs to Israel, God said so. Well, now it's a done deal. There's no way to reverse that. And so here we are. I don't expect any reasonable response to that.
You're right, I have no reasonable response to that. I think you put it very well.
Israeli settlers moved across to West Bank. Nothing was said or done.
Well, a lot has been said. It goes back to, well, let's say the dividing line was 1967, because that's when Israel claimed the West Bank that had been administered by Jordan. And we all knew about it. So, yeah. Maybe not enough has been said, but I don't think this is something, conspiracy to cover up what was going on.
Well, no, but why did no one respond and say you can't do that?
People have been responding and saying you can't do that for as long as I can remember. But it doesn't seem to, as I said, I think some of it to begin with was creating facts on the ground, trying to, as a prod to negotiations. But the longer it goes on, the more it becomes an obstacle to negotiations. But it's been well reported over the years, but I think beginning even as soon as 1967 or shortly thereafter. For some years afterwards, another thing Henry Kissinger said after 1967 is, we will defend Israel, but we will not defend its conquests. So it certainly wasn't true that that somehow the United States was conniving with Israel to hold on to the West Bank.
Hi, I'm visiting today. I'm on the wait list. This is a very interesting topic to me. What I know about the issue of the settlers in the West Bank is that it's more a political issue.
Certainly is now,
the
yes.
settlers are ultra-religious that believe the land belongs to them because exactly what you said, from the river to the sea, that this land belongs to them, to Israel. And depending on the government, on the party that is controlling the government at the time, they are either removed or they're allowed to stay. Right now at the moment, they are being allowed to stay because Netanyahu will lose his majority, therefore he won't be prime minister anymore. So he needs his majority, and the majority right now is religious, ultra-religious. So he won't do anything about the settlers because he is in power and he doesn't want to be out the power.
Yeah, well, I think you're quite right about that. That's one reason that the settlement movement has increased in recent years, is because the government, Israel is pretty well split, as is the United States for that matter, politically. And the political context is very important, as you say. So parties that were never in the government before are in because Netanyahu's base is narrowing, and he needs them, which means he's got to give them what they want. And there's another reason too, and that is he's been accused of corruption. And if he loses the prime ministership, well, then of course he'll be going on trial. There was this week. There was the Toronto International Film Festival, and one of the interesting moments was when they played a documentary with actual video footage of the interrogation by the Israeli judicial authorities of Netanyahu. He's been accused of corruption, bribery, and of course he was denying it. Israel has a law that precedes Netanyahu. This is not something he did, but it's an unusual law that the protection of privacy means if you've got footage like that, you can't. It's immediately libelous to release it. So this film will never be shown legally in Israel. But here it was in Toronto. Of course, the Israeli authorities are furious. They tried to stop it, but failed. So, yeah, it's well known that he's got these legal problems, and this is one way to keep himself out of jail, is to feed the right wing, the settlers, by giving them their head.
So where do we go from here? What is the next likely event? Are we looking for another assassination?
I hope not. Well, as I said, all wars end, and I was pretty vague about what's going to happen after the ending of this war. But people have been talking about it for several months. The other Arab countries and the United States. What kind of interim government can we set up? Anything will be better than a continued war, but you still want something that conceivably has some staying power. But with time and patience, all will become clear to us. Okay, well, thank you very much.